So welcome to Let's Talk Evolution. So Let's Talk Evolution is a series of podcasts with senior leaders within technology and transformation across the world. I think we've done well over 2,000 podcasts with senior leaders over the last 5 years, talking about various different topics around technology, change, transformation, the impact that has on society, on jobs, and on different industry sectors. I think today I'm delighted to be joined by Matthias Hendrichs. He's a Global Chief Commercial Officer at MODIFI. And I think in the past, Matthias has founded and invested in multiple startups, but also has experience in some of the best known companies in the world, including LVMH and Apple. So I guess I'm super excited about this one because most of the podcasts that we've done recently have been with senior leaders within large MNCs, particularly banks. And while the content has been super interesting and valuable, I think, coming at it from a slightly different angle, particularly with a focus on startups and the opportunities that startup companies have in the current ecosystem with AI being the buzzword of the moment, is a really, really interesting topic to explore. So the title of the podcast today, or the content that we're exploring today, is how AI lowers the barrier to building companies. So Matthias, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jake.
So we'll jump straight in with the question shortly, but first off, if you wouldn't mind just giving a brief introduction on yourself, that'd be brilliant.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Jake, for having me here, and very keen and eager to contribute to your channel. Very briefly about myself. I have about 30 years of professional background, 20 years here in Asia and 10 years in Europe. I'm originally from Germany. And I spent these 30 years roughly across 3 buckets. Startups, as you pointed out, is one bucket, roughly 10 years across my own startups, as well as the scale up MODIFI, where I'm currently the Chief Commercial Officer. Then the second bucket would be corporate roles in tech companies like Apple, but also in leading other industries like LVMH, BASF, even Bertelsmann, leading media company in Europe. And then third bucket would be strategy and consulting roles. So I was with Booz & Company and other premium strategy consulting firms. So the interesting thing is typically people are leaning towards either being a startup person or a corporate person or an advisor. I love blending all 3 buckets and not just one after the other, but throughout my 30 years, I'm going back and forth between those 3, and I find it extremely enriching for myself and also hopefully impactful for the companies I'm working with. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I think today specifically we're talking about how AI lowers the bar to building companies. But as we talked about previously, feel free to take it in any direction you want.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first question that we've got feedback people would be quite interested in hearing about is, obviously you spent your career scaling startups, as well as the other types of organization you mentioned, but disrupting legacy industries, driving commercial transformation. I guess from your perspective, what does real disruption actually look like today in the age of AI, and where are the biggest opportunities?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question. And interestingly, sometimes when I started a company, I wasn't sitting down with a pen and paper and thinking about what are industries that need disruption and what is the university textbook definition of disruption, but rather what are the pain points in my life that I saw, and I wanted to change them, right? Like in 2010, I was based in Hong Kong at that time. I started the world's first smartphone-based travel guide. And that was not because I thought, after a study of industries, that's the sweet spot. But I was an avid traveler myself, and I just wanted to have an entertaining, fun experience in my pocket. And I wanted to use it on a trip to, let's say, Bangkok for the weekend, rather than, reading A Lonely Planet, right? So if you listen to that, there are a lot of disruption elements in there, right? And I think that's also maybe the way that at least I think about that, right? So if you think about AI and what disruption will we see over the coming years, it's look at industries that maybe are very complex, that are very highly regulated, maybe even that are boring, right? And people don't typically go into them. I think AI lends itself very nicely to reviving and doing things in a different way, right? And disrupting them, right? I think that's more the way I look at disruption, right? Let's look at, I don't know, global trade, right? MODIFI, where I'm currently at, is a trade finance company, and we are offering SME exporters around the world financial services that previously only banks would offer to large corporates, right? And technology, not only AI, but technology in general, allows us to go downstream and offer such services also to SMEs, right? With the help of technology and digitization and so on. So AI also changes the boundary here. So I think if you look at payments, if you look at logistics, at trade, at all these kind of industries, I think are ripe for AI-driven disruption, and I think that's all of them might be good ways to start.
Yeah, fantastic. I think super interesting points there, and I think a lot of people watching might be going, oh, what is the industry? What is the industry that AI is going to disrupt the most? And I think, like you talked about, it's real world problems that historically have been quite complex to solve, which are now easier to solve through the technology that's been available. I think you sit in a pub or in a coffee shop and loads of people have these ideas on what to do. And I think that kind of brings us to the second question. Many people have ideas, but never really act on them. What do you think what do you think stops individuals and teams moving beyond sort of ideation, conversations into actual action and innovation? And how can companies create safe environments for intrapreneurs to experiment?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, right? And I've seen that so many times throughout my 30-year career so far, and like people coming to me, be it friends, be it colleagues, and they'd say, oh, I have this amazing idea, and sometimes these ideas were just ideas, right? And then talking them through with a friend already shows you all the loopholes. But sometimes you can't spot the loophole, right? And I know that from myself and from people coming to me, right? And then you talk to more people, and they all say, well, that's actually sounds like a really interesting idea. Nobody can give you a guarantee, but it's very encouraging to hear that people can resonate positively to your ideas. But then, at least in my circle, a lot of people don't go the last step, and oftentimes that means maybe quitting your job and starting a company. And of course, there's a huge risk, right? The older you get, or let's say when you have families and children to look after, of course, that risk is not just about yourself; it's about the responsibility that you may have for other people. So I think the hurdles are getting higher. So number one is maybe you try these things when you're a little younger or a little earlier in your career. Is definitely easier. But then there are also these, and you mentioned them as intrapreneurs, right? Like inside the company, right? Which is a huge value, not just for yourself, but for the company, obviously, right? So every corporate I worked would love to have people who have that kind of mindset, who don't just come up with an idea, but ideally see them through and start implementing. And I think here that one maybe goes out a little bit to my fellow leaders. I think you need to provide a certain space in your company. Number one is not every idea will be the next billion-dollar breakthrough, and that's not because that person who came up with the idea did anything wrong. So that means failure is part of the game, and sometimes failure is even is even wanted, maybe, right? Or is at least leading to something new and something great. So failure is not necessarily a bad thing. So you, as a leader, you need to encourage people that even failing is not bad for your career in the company, right? I think that's a very important part. And number two is you need to give a certain space, right? So if you know, most people are super busy morning to evening with work, with calls, with meetings. Nobody can expect that you do that, I don't know, on these intrapreneurial activities on the weekend, right? So you need to give them some space, some time, which might mean you, as a leader, you need to budget for that, right? As you do for other projects and other initiatives, you need to budget. If you want to have a real impact and outcome, you need to budget for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that role of intrapreneur is kind of becoming increasingly valuable in a lot of companies. And I guess talking to our clients, and that ranges from very large global management consulting companies through to smaller startups. I guess the one thing one piece of feedback that we get quite consistently is that actually those people are a minority. Like the people with
Absolutely.
ideas that they're willing to test and trial and fail on is a minority of the overall organization. And the second thing is that, you know, those people are normally in quite roles of quite high level of responsibility. So, you know, you touched on a couple of points there, but I guess is your experience that type of person is also in the minority in organizations? And then if those people are also in fairly either senior or, you know, high demand roles, what sort of tactics could a company use to enable them to invest some time in that intrapreneurship, if you like?
Yeah, indeed. I remember at some of my previous companies, some of them had very sophisticated HR evaluations and surveys and so on. And the part that most of them struggled was not having the right specialists in their respective fields, not having general leadership ability among their workforce. But what was always in short were entrepreneurial people who are risk takers, right? In a controlled field, obviously, right? Because there is a difference between an entrepreneur, you know, where you clearly have no boundaries versus inside a company. But I think there's, for anyone who has that kind of inclination, there's huge opportunity within existing organizations. So I think I've seen that backed by surveys and studies. So number one. Number two is, have I seen that in more senior roles or more junior roles? And I think it's a mix. Oftentimes, people perceive that kind of such decisions can only be made by very senior people, maybe business unit leaders or you know, senior team leaders. But I think that's not true. At least I've always encouraged even the most junior people, right, from internships to early career starters, to come up with their ideas, right, and then give them certain room. I know Google is quite famous that they dedicate, I think, 20% of your workforce or working time that you can allocate to a project of your own choosing. So I think that's obviously great. I mean, 20% is a day a week. That's quite a lot. But I think the more you can allow as a company for people to go after and try out these ideas, the better the result will be, right? Otherwise, it's very much lip services. And we've all probably been to a lot of innovation workshops where after the end of the workshop, nothing really happens, right? Everyone says like, oh yeah, great example about, I don't know, Starbucks and this and that example, right? All these kind of business school books. But then nothing changes in your day-to-day life, right? I think that's where I hope we can make a difference here.
Yeah, makes sense. And with AI and automation kind of lowering the barrier to starting and scaling a business, I think there's a lot of commentators online, Alex Hormozy, Daniel Priestley, who talked about the age of the solo founder, effectively, because the concept is a lot of the back office work that has been burdensome on an entrepreneurial founder is potentially now taken care of in some part or in the most part by AI and automation tools. And then the second component is to test and iterate an idea in the real world is something that potentially can be realized quicker. So you can start and fail more quickly with the tools and agents and assistants that are now available. But what kind of sort of mindset and skills or attributes will matter most or matter still for the next generation of founders and operator leaders?
Yeah, I think this is brilliant, right? And that gets me so excited that well, I've done kind of the entire journey. And my first startup was in 1996, right? And there was obviously no AI. A lot of people argue that AI is older than the last 2-3 years, which is more the age of Gen AI, right? And we have machine learning and all of that for a long time. But I think so I think the way the support founders get from developing your MVPs, your minimal viable product, your prototype, if you will, right? Even if you're not a technical founder, you can come up with a prototype using vibe coding and so on that is good enough to exemplify the idea. Even in some cases, all the way to get your first funding, right? So that's super exciting. But to me, I think number one, this is what is important is you don't become too tool driven, right? Because of AI can do so many things, you still need to be in control, right? And maybe it's a little easier for me to say that because in the days without AI, I had to be in control, right? And especially as a former consultant, it's easy to outsource your brain to either a consultant or now to an AI, but you still need to do the thinking. So you still need to be the one who comes up with the idea, who does the initial problem solving, right? The AI can't tell you what is the opportunity, right? You might think it can, but I'm not so confident on that, right? So you need to be in charge, number one. You need to use the AI as a tool to help you and to scale for you. You need to be a much better communicator because, and with the help of AI, I think you are also supported in that space. You need to look at things like overall, cross maybe your product, your marketing, your sales idea. Those are still things where you as a human being need to be in control, right? So I think everything that you can be that can be automated or supported, great. Get the support that you want, but make sure you're still the human and the human being kind of in the loop, right? That's still, at least today, what differentiates us. And that's why the company is not, at least not yet AI run, but run by people like us who also take the risk ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just on the point of the opportunity for founder leaders and solo founders and the other end that you mentioned, you've worked for companies like Booz, you've worked for companies like LVMH, you've worked for companies, in hyperscale or in scale up mode and also in pure startup mode. I guess more so than ever, in my experience, more so than ever before, I think people are worried about jobs. Putting it bluntly, it's the sustainability of what you're currently doing or the sustainability of the company you're currently working for, or the value or the relevance of the product or service that your company has historically delivered, or the value and relevance of your role within that company. So if people are kind of in that mindset at the moment, or in that paradigm where they're worried about what's coming next, and I think if we look at the the thought leaders, if you like. There's two ends of the spectrum. Like one is, oh, don't worry, AI is just like Excel. It's just a tool that people are going to use to make their work easier. And then the other end of the spectrum is Armageddon. 10 to 15 years of dystopia and ending in potential Armageddon. So there's a lot of well-publicized sort of ex-AI safety leaders within big tech who are maybe leaning on the latter side, and then people who are stalwarts in software engineering saying, no, don't worry, it's just like Excel. So it's very extreme sort of polarizing views on what's next. But in terms of sort of practical advice to people who are concerned about which end of the spectrum is the truth, and what you can do on a sort of day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis to weather the potential disruption. I don't think anyone's saying there won't be disruption. I think everyone agrees there is already and likely to be further disruption in the job market, putting it bluntly. So what advice would you have for people maybe sort of transversing that reality, that new reality, and then maybe looking at a founder route, remaining relevant in a big company route, or finding the product or service that's most relevant in their field?
Yeah, I think this is a very timely question, and I mean, maybe starting with your spectrum, right, from the one end to the other end of that it's obviously extremely hard to predict, right? And I think on a high aggregated level, I don't know where we will end up. I would say both. I understand both positions. I think if you break it down a little, one step closer to different jobs, be it software engineering, be it, I don't know, many other roles, I think it becomes a bit easier to say if it's a tool that is supporting you, or if it's something that will take your job away, or at least change it dramatically. And I think depending on which job we're talking, I think some jobs will either go away or will change drastically and dramatically. And I think if you are in one of those areas, change is not a bad thing, right? So disruption, although the word to me sounds always with a little bit of a negative connotation, is not necessarily negative, right? It just means there's a need for action, right? And the need for action, regardless in which of these buckets you are, is lifelong learning, right? And embrace AI as a new way of first of all helping you learn, helping you grow. Maybe doing things that you always wanted but you never could, right? Remember, not everyone might be a Star Wars fan here, right? But the first three parts of Star Wars were only produced much later because George Lucas couldn't, because technology wasn't there, right? So now it's not AI, but AI is another technology that allows some of us maybe to do what they always wanted but never could, right? And from writing music, for example, right? So that with Suno and there are many examples, right? So if you look at the spectrum, what excites you? What can AI help you do? Help you learn? So please, go out and qualify yourself and train and read up about all of these. Try it out. It has never been as easy as it is now. And I think some of that you will also require for your job, right? And if your job is being affected, maybe by some transformation, right? There has always been transformation. I'm a former strategy consultant, right? We called it 10 years ago, we called it digital transformation, right? It is nothing about AI, but a lot of things changed, right? And a lot of things that were very paper-based were digitized, and a lot of kind of old jobs changed into something new. Did it mean people got unemployed? Not necessarily, right? So their job changed to something else. You can use your time, your precious time, because so far kind of our human brain is still very valuable. You can use that for something that is more value creating than something that maybe can be automated or where we use certain systems, right? So the short answer, keep learning and keep growing your own skills. Find areas that excite you. Don't do that as a homework because you have to, or somebody told you have to. Usually that doesn't work very well in my experience.
Yeah.
Find something that you feel passionate about.
I think that's really good advice, and I think one of a good friend of mine who recently contributed on a podcast, who again has a transversed large multinational companies, but more recently focused more on startup, private equity, incubation, and stuff like that. Is the one piece of advice to anyone who has an idea or has concern about the relevance or the long-term value of their role is like, do AI. His quote was, "Do AI," and I was like, "What do you mean by that?" And it mirrored exactly what you said. Give it a try. It's the barrier to entry is very low at the moment in terms of how do I get this tool on my desktop, and how do I pilot a couple of ideas, and even certainly large companies have some sort of internal AI tool now where people can go in and even experiment building their own agents and stuff like that. And I think, my sense is that if people are in a more administratively focused role, or a role that's theoretically more exposed to AI disruption, the top people in that profession, if supercharged by AI, will now be able to contribute huge amounts more output than they previously were, and that will take longer to fully disrupt and sustain value for longer. So yeah, I think that's brilliant advice. Give it a try, and if you give it a try in a field that you're passionate about, then you're far more likely to see some value personally and potentially some market value.
Absolutely.
Cool. So I guess just in concluding, super interesting points and there, but touching on the topic, so AI lowering the barrier to building company. If there's just, other than trying AI that we've just talked about, what's one piece of advice to people at the moment who are kind of considering a founder route in the age of AI?
So I think it's has never been as easy, right? That downward risk is very minimal, right? So I've as I said in the beginning, I maneuvered my journey from corporate to a startup and back to corporate and back to startup and in between consulting and so on a few times, right? So and I think there's a perceived barrier, but don't fall for that, right? So everything that you try as an entrepreneur will just increase your market value, increase your knowledge, and unfortunately, as we all know, the statistics go like a lot of the startups will not be $1 billion company. That is okay. You will still have a much richer set of experience, and you can always go back to what you did before. So if you say, well, after a year or two in your startup, it didn't work out, go back to your corporate role. You can still do all of that, and you can do much, much more. So what's the downward risk?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point and fantastic thing to conclude on. I think the opportunity now, albeit people are perceiving more risk than there ever has been before, the other way of looking at it is there's less risk to giving something a try. So give it a try, take a risk is great advice. I think anyone looking and viewing this podcast in that position would take a lot of value from what you said. So thank you, Matthias. It's been super interesting discussing this topic. Thanks again so much for your time joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Jake, for having me.